Welcome, horror fans. Monster Fred here. Once again, we've reached that time of year where witches, ghosts, and the other children of the night come out to play. This season, I've put together a little checklist, pulling out some of the essential, must-own horror films that belong in the collection of every horror fan. And as always, I present them in no real order. So now, without further delay, let's get started.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
First up, Night of the Living Dead. A small group of people barricade themselves in an old farmhouse to protect themselves from a breed of flesh-eating zombies. Decades before shows like The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead, there was this George A. Romero classic. And it just goes to show what you can do on a low budget and a lot of imagination. While we've had our share of zombie pictures before this came out, Night of the Living Dead broke new ground, taking zombies where they'd never been before. And it continues to thrill audiences to this day. Here are the scores. Next, Dracula. The ancient vampire lord Count Dracula arrives in England and begins to prey upon the virtuous young Mina.
Why, it looked as if you could reach out and touch them. Would you like me to get your hat?
Bela Lugosi's take on Bram Stoker's immortal vampire left a permanent mark in horror. He's easily one of the most recognized and imitated to ever take the role, especially when you add in his natural Hungarian accent.
I am Dracula.
This picture was definitely one that helped put vampire flicks on the map. And while it doesn't follow Stoker's book to the letter, it's still one of the more memorable adaptations. And on top of that, who could ever forget Renfield's classic laugh?
Why, he's mad.
Here are the scores.
You think it's a dog?
An American Werewolf in London. Two American college students on a walking tour of Britain are attacked by a werewolf on the moors they were told to avoid. I saw this way back as a kid and had just come off seeing The Howling. And while watching this one, I remember jumping out of my seat in the theater because I'd never seen anything like it on screen. As I've mentioned in my werewolf video, this is directed by John Landis, the man behind Michael Jackson's now famous Thriller. And special effects master Rick Baker really made the audience believe in werewolves, with transformation scenes that cast a huge shadow over all the werewolf films to follow.
I didn't mean to call you Meatloaf, Jack!
Here are the scores. Up next, Eyes Without a Face. A surgeon causes an accident which leaves his daughter disfigured and goes to extreme measures to give her a new face. There were a lot of great horror pictures that came out of the 60s, and this classic was added to the list not only because of its reputation, but it was also suggested by one of my viewers, Jason Hurd. have I ever been able to call a horror picture dark and beautiful, all in the same sentence. But I think it's a good fit here. And let's be honest, weren't we all just a little curious as to what was under the mask? And after the reveal, we weren't at all disappointed. Here are the scores.
Well, what would you like to do? Got any ideas?
The Exorcist. When a teenage girl is possessed by a mysterious entity, her mother seeks the help of two priests to save her. All right, folks, this is one of the big ones. I was taken to see this when I was around 6 years old. And what a perfect film for a budding monster to see, who would later go on to review horror movies.
Until she rots and lies stinking in the earth.
Needless to say, that back in those days, this put one hell of a scare in its audience, and hasn't let up to this day.
But deliver us from the evil one.
You honestly can't talk about horror films without bringing this one up.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Here are the scores.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
Next, The Omen. Mysterious deaths surround an American ambassador. Could the child that he is raising actually be the Antichrist? I remember this one, not only for its psychological and brutal scenes of horror, but its musical score by Jerry Goldsmith, as well as ending with Damien's haunting smile, knowing that evil lives on. And did you happen to notice that almost everything in this picture is evil? Everything from riding a tricycle to evil showing up in photographs. Who knew evil was so photogenic? And you know you must have a problem child when you need special daggers to keep him in line. Even Dr. Phil would have passed on this kid. Here are the scores.
Welcome home, Larry.
I'm mighty glad to be here, Father.
The Wolfman. A man returns to his homeland and is attacked by a werewolf, and in turn is infected with the curse. If you're a fan of werewolf pictures, then this simply has to go into your collection, if it's not already. And you really can't talk about werewolf films or classic horror and not bring up the name of Lon Chaney Jr.
Go ahead and shoot before he bites you.
Who could ever forget his performance as the ever-worried Lawrence Talbot, always having the look of a man who had been cursed.
Go now. And heaven help you.
Werewolf pictures were never the same after this was released. For certain, the genre has been through some changes since this came out, but this will always be a classic. Here are the scores. Up next, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The monstrous spirit of Freddy Krueger seeks revenge by invading the dreams of teenagers whose parents were responsible for his untimely death. We've seen a lot of different things pop up in horror films over the years, but there was nothing quite like this before it came out. I remember all the talk back in high school before I saw it. How some maniac was going around killing people with knives on his fingers, and in their dreams no less. When I finally saw it, I knew then, as I do now, that this was something special. Hands down, one of Wes Craven's best and most imaginative. And being that Robert Englund's Freddy is truly one of a kind, my advice to Hollywood would be to stop doing remakes and just re-release the original in theaters. I'm sure there'd be an audience for it. And the fans, they might appreciate it more. Here are the scores.
Cut me loose! Cut me the hell! Come on, get me out of here! Come on, get me out of here!
The Thing. A research team in Antarctica is hunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. There are some directors that rarely, if ever, let you down. First, John Carpenter hit us with Halloween, and then The Fog. And after that, he gave us The Thing. Let's be honest, most remakes don't live up to the originals, though from time to time, there are others that go over and beyond. Who out there saw the original, and then later saw this? I, for one, was not ready for what I saw on screen.
You gotta be kidding.
While the 80s did have its share of schlock, it did happen to produce some great films like this. Here are the scores.
It's alive! Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Next, Frankenstein. An obsessed scientist assembles a living being from parts of exhumed corpses. Out of all the takes on Frankenstein I've ever seen, for me, nothing tops the one that made Boris Karloff a horror legend. Like Lugosi's Dracula, Karloff's monster is still one of the most imitated. I think we also have to take notice of the fact that few horror films ever have the honor of becoming a classic, let alone one that inspired another in Stan Lee's The Incredible Hulk.
Sit down.
Here are the scores.
She'll surprise us, knowing that mother of hers.
Up next, Carrie. Carrie White, a shy, friendless teenage girl, unleashes her telekinetic powers after being humiliated by her classmates at her senior prom. Directed by Brian De Palma and based on the novel by Stephen King, Carrie's a strong example that dangerous things can come in quiet packages. While this is an all-around great film, the prom scene is the one we all know and talk about, as it turns out to be the best and worst night of Carrie's life. It's a vengeance that was long in coming, harsh, sweet, and indiscriminate. I'll never forget when I saw this in the theater and the audience's reaction at the ending. To this day, something in me jumps just a little, even though I know it's coming. And here's a small Easter egg. The actress PJ Soles who played Norma Watson, would later go on to play a role in another well-known horror film, Halloween. Here are the scores. Next up, Hereditary. After the family matriarch passes away, a grieving family is haunted by tragic and disturbing occurrences and begin to unravel dark secrets. Here's another must-have for the serious collector. The powerful performance of Toni Collette by itself should be enough to add it to your collection.
Oh, what a waste. If it could have maybe brought us together or something. If you could have just said, I'm sorry, or faced up to what happened. Maybe then we could do something with this, but you can't take responsibility for anything!
I don't often review modern horror pictures, mostly because they're usually inundated with ridiculous jump scares and tropes that should have died out over 20 years ago. But this was making quite a bit of buzz across the internet. And keeping an open mind, I decided to take a chance.
Peter, sweetheart, wake up. What? It's okay, it's me. I am so sorry for everything. Please forgive me. I can't stand the things I said.
In the end, it turns out to have restored much of the waning hope I had for horror films produced these days. Here are the scores. Let the right one in. An overlooked and bullied boy finds love and revenge through a beautiful girl with a secret.
Är du vampyr? Jag lever på blod.
Over the years, I've come to hold foreign cinema in high regard, because their horror films seem willing to take more chances and explore some different ideas.
Fryser du inte? Nej. Varför det? Jag har väl glömt hur man gör.
Whereas here in the West, we seemed at times tapped for something new, hence the wealth of remakes and reboots. I've been a fan of vampire movies ever since I was a kid, and it's reassuring to see that the genre is still in good hands.
Då har du chans på mig. Va? Då är vi ihop.
Here are the scores. Nosferatu. Vampire Count Orlok expresses interest in a new residence and the real estate agent's wife. While I love what Lugosi did for vampire films, and even respect the influence it had, Max Schreck's Nosferatu is truly the stuff of nightmares. Not being an authorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's book, a few things needed to be changed. For instance, the name of Count Dracula was changed to Count Orlok. Any changes made, however, didn't stop this from being one of the creepiest and most haunting of vampire films. Here are the scores.
In some instances, only parts of a corpse had been removed.
Next, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. 2 siblings and 3 of their friends fall victim to a family of cannibalistic psychopaths and the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. If I were allowed only one word to describe this picture, that word would be unrelenting. Because once the horror began, it just didn't let up. Obviously, most of this is due to Leatherface. But there's also the impressive performance of actress Marilyn Burns. Between her screams and the grinding of Leatherface's blood-soaked chainsaw, there was no escaping the sheer terror. And speaking of Leatherface, you'll notice that most killers in this genre adopted the knife as their weapon of choice. But he decided to go all out and choose the chainsaw. Talk about thinking, or in this case, killing, outside the box. Here are the scores.
They had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive.
The Shining. A family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter, where a sinister presence influences the father into violence. Here's another based on a book from horror master Stephen King, and it's psychological horror done just the way it should be.
Come and play with us, Daddy. Forever.
Though it had a rocky start, as far as critics go, it was well on its way to becoming a horror classic. I hear even Roger Ebert had to change his mind about it.
Red.
From the beginning, I've held an appreciation for the number of memorable scenes and the oft-quoted, "Here's Johnny."
Here's Johnny!
And honestly, after I saw it all those years ago, I still have a problem seeing Jack Nicholson in any other light. Here are the scores.
Seems she has intercepted a transmission of unknown origin. She got us up to check it out.
Next up, Alien. After a space merchant vessel perceives an unknown transmission as a distress call, after finding its source, one of the crew is attacked by a mysterious life form. By now, I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you why this belongs in your collection. Now, does anyone else remember the old tagline from the original trailers? In space, no one can hear you scream. Well, back in those days, who'd have thought a picture about an alien would end up so scary? And let's not leave out the amazing creature designs by H.R. Giger. Thanks to him, I've never seen an alien look so alien before. Then, of course, there's the Predator design too, but that's a different video. Here are the scores. Rosemary's Baby. A young couple moves into an apartment only to be surrounded by peculiar neighbors and strange occurrences.
Get back! You know her.
Here's one, by its title, could have been a simple romantic comedy. Unfortunate for us, they didn't go that route. Turns out that this is one of the few films I've experienced where I can feel actual evil. If you've seen Roman Polanski's Repulsion, you'll feel his distinctive style, that slow burn leading to a big payoff. And speaking of payoffs, Rosemary's iconic discovery at the end is some of the darkest stuff I've ever seen.
What have you done to him, you maniac?
Satan is his father, not Guy.
Once again, there are few films that leave lasting impressions, and this is definitely one of them. Here are the scores. next, Halloween. 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night, Michael Myers escapes from a mental hospital and returns to the small town of Haddonfield to kill again. This is arguably John Carpenter's greatest work. And for me, Michael Myers was love at first fright. Early on, audiences saw something special in the character. And who knew that the ghostly white, fresh face would go on to be one of the most recognized figures in the history of horror? Not to mention that chilling theme composed by John Carpenter himself. I loved it so much, I performed a version of it myself. Check out the link below. Anyway, after so many absurdly amusing sequels, they still haven't managed to capture the magic of the original. Although the 2018 film did come the closest.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Here are the scores.
Is anything wrong?
Of course not.
Up next, Psycho. A secretary embezzles money from her employer's client, goes on the run, and checks into a remote hotel run by an unusual young man. Here's the classic from director Alfred Hitchcock, and I'm sure this still puts a lot of people off on taking showers. We have to admit that Psycho's influence has touched many of the films on this list, and countless others. As a longtime fan, sometimes I wish I had a time machine I could just hop into, just to relive all this great horror when it was still new.
Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
Here are the scores. Still with me? Good for you. Now, let's really get our fright on. Up next are some bonus flicks to consider. Let's continue.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
Like this? Do you like being food for the immortals? Do you like dying? Stop.
I told you not to disturb me.
Friday the 13th.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Wait, please wait.
No time for argument.
Come. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
Accept our sacrifice and make our blossoms fruit.
Está muerta. Señora, estése quieta. Señora. No se mueva.
Don't you tell what we did, X.
Well, that's all for now, kiddies. Consider this list as only the beginning, as there are a great many films not listed here. So feel free to list those in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll be seeing you in the abyss.